Welcome back to Yes, I'm Adopted, Don't Make It Weird with Brett and Davo. So today's episode, this is just a little precursor to everything that's happening. We mentioned it in the weekend update, but you may want to screen this, parents, before you send it to your kids or watch it with them. Because we're going to be talking about some possibly sensitive subjects that they may not be ready to talk about, or you may not be ready to talk about.
We're not sure we're ready to talk about it.
We're going to try to get through this and see what we can come up with. So, that is just the warning. Thank you guys, though, for joining us on today's episode. Davo, you ready?
No.
Me neither. But let's do it.
Let's just do it.
Let's just jump right in.
Okay, so I'm going to intro this by saying that first we're going to talk a little bit about vernacular, right? So a lot of the things,
important.
yeah, a lot of the things that we've seen in a lot of the groups and stuff that caused drama and chaos in the forums and in the internet chat groups and all these things are that people have different definitions for how they say things, especially within their individual groups. So
Yes.
every group seems to have its own vernacular, and we want to clarify some of that now, just so you know what our definitions of our things, so that you don't be like, I don't know, yelling at
They
us.
belittle the way I feel about things.
And we may do that, but
probably.
maybe not on purpose, or maybe if we do on purpose, I guess we'll let you know. But so, like for instance, when we typically around here refer to the difference between mom and mother, right? What I'm talking about, and I think this is true for both of us, is mom is usually mom, like that raised me,
Yep.
mom, adopted mom.
Hi, Mom.
I can't do that. And we haven't even begun the discussion yet. And mother is usually in reference to the life bearer.
The life bearer, yes.
Mother, life bearer of life. In that regard, we're also going to define real quick what we're going to be talking about today, which is the differences between trauma and grief.
Yep.
And we've touched a little bit on this before, and we're just going to share a couple of stories and talk about how those have shaped us. When we talk about trauma, we're referring to the physical impact on the brain that, in our case, infant separation trauma has caused, and how that's kind of manifested over the last lifetime. But when we talk about grief, it's less talking about the physical manifestation of that in the brain and more about the psychological manifestation of like loss.
Yep.
Like, so when we talk about grief, we're talking about that we experienced a loss when we were pre-verbal, and then usually what happens is that it all comes up later when we're actually able to verbally define that.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that, and that is our vernacular for a couple of terms.
Yeah, we're gonna be sharing a little bit about the trauma that took place when we were infants and our, I guess, speculation of it, because we don't really remember. Okay, this is a dumb question, but we do hear this question often, and we did bring it up in one of our videos. What do you remember about the orphanage? So a little bit of backstory. We were adopted when I was 5 months and you were 3 months. And so we don't remember any of that stuff. We were pre-verbal to the whole thing. We didn't know what was happening. All we knew is we were born and then we went somewhere else. I jumped around from different orphanages and different foster homes. I don't know. Did you get to stay with one?
I had one foster family, and then that was it.
Yeah.
So that question doesn't really even apply to me.
No. Me neither. But the connections that I wasn't able to make started forming these different pathways in my brain, and like honestly, like we've talked about this again, is I'm super clingy, and I had no idea why for the longest time. Whenever I found somebody that I really liked, I would just cling to them. I would do it now, but he would hit me or dump hot tea on me.
That's true.
And you would enjoy it, so here we go.
This video just took a turn.
but like there was a trauma that took place that we didn't really know how to deal with in our brains. It formed different pathways, and we're going to talk a little bit about neuroplasticity later and how you can actually reform those pathways. You can do it. All the angry adopted people and just angry people in general, you can change. It's physically possible and scientifically proven. You just have to try.
Yay!
Hooray! Let's get that out there right now. Make the people angry right off the bat.
It is difficult, but it's doable.
Yeah, we've done it.
Yeah, so
we've done it.
I mean, that's possible. So the trauma is the physical loss of that occurs, which mostly typically resembles PTSD and how people respond to things. And in adoptees, in your case, it was clinginess. In my case, it was also clinginess.
Right. Because we had nobody to really cling to, right? We had nobody to attach to.
And an inability or a difficulty with intimacy. Yeah. So it's like it's the combination of those two things, and it's not. They're paradoxical together, which makes it all that much more fun.
Man, it's not pretty. It's not pretty.
Yeah. But then the grief side of that is largely psychological and has to do with not being able to verbally process the loss that you felt.
Right.
Because you felt that, right? And so in the last few years we've experienced different kinds of grief. We've lost friends and family and stuff like that we've known since maturing
forever,
and being older and being able to process that. But as an adult, I can process that. As an infant, I couldn't, which meant that it took until I was able to for all of that stuff to build up and then kind of rush out all at once.
Oh man, right? That's always an interesting phase.
So
always an interesting phase.
For instance, being in middle school is hard. Anyway. Right? But then you add on top of that the fact that you've never properly grieved for losing your initial family or culture or whatever it is, because you experienced that as a loss. But you didn't know it then. Yeah. And all of a sudden you do.
Yep.
And at least this has been my experience. I'm pretty sure this is your experience, and a lot of the research corroborates this, is that when that occurs, the trauma side experiences one thing, but the grief side actually manifests usually as difficulties with self-worth. And so the question that almost every adoptee that we've talked to and that we've seen in the research usually asks sometime around adolescence, the teenage years, that sort of thing, is the very difficult question to have to hear and try to answer, which is centered around this: why didn't she want me?
Yep.
And this is where we say, don't have watched that with your kids yet.
Again, go back to our previous warning.
Because I very specifically remember that moment.
Oh man,
in my life, and I'm pretty sure.
Right. I don't remember really verbalizing that to many people. I think I did to my wife when we were dating, like once or twice. But okay, so I wasn't a person that liked to inconvenience people, right? You know, if it was going to inconvenience somebody, I would just, suck it up and deal with it or bottle it up inside, and I wouldn't say anything. And so I never wanted to bring that question up to people and put that stress on them to have to deal with my crying, essentially.
Sure. And
so I would struggle and wrestle with this one for ever. It took me the longest time. Whenever I would go to sleep at night, it would be for a little bit the last thought I had before I fell asleep. And most people growing up would never know that about me. I hid it so well, but it was always something that would just eat at the back of my mind constantly. It's like, okay, what would my life have been if I weren't adopted? And I love my parents. I love the people around me. I love my family. They're amazing. I'm so happy to be with them. But that doesn't always mean that the question's not going to present itself.
Sure.
And you're not going to think about it. So parents out there, if your kid hasn't fully processed that yet, it's a doozy.
And there are chances that you'll never hear about it. Or there are chances that you'll hear about it all at once.
Yeah.
So Brett is one end of that spectrum. I very specifically remember 6th grade, and we talked about this on the YouTube, but I think it was a side note more than anything else.
Probably. Most of our stuff is.
Yeah. I very specifically remember in 6th grade being assigned the Family Tree Project. And the Family Tree Project is fantastic and great unless you've not processed some stuff and suddenly it comes up because I'd never had the thought before, right? Before that Family Tree Project in 6th grade, social studies. I had never really thought about the circumstances surrounding my life previous to the life that I lived.
Right.
Right? And I remember thinking, okay, so mom goes here and dad goes here and grandma and grandpa go here and blah blah blah. And hang on a second. Where does mother go? Where does my birth family go on this thing? And who are they? And
Right.
oh my gosh, I have a whole nother life that I could have lived. And what should I do? And how come I'm not there and I'm here and I don't look like anybody and I have this whole identity crisis, and all of this took place in our guest room because that's where we kept all the files, and I'm I'm sobbing and my mom is like, what, nobody prepared me for this, and what am I supposed to do? And and just it all just came out. Like, I grieved 13 years in an afternoon because it never came up before, and that's the first time that it had come up, and I had words to describe what was going on. There's nothing to say, like, there's no way to make that easier. There's no way to make that quote unquote better.
Right.
But
you're not going to make it okay.
But it needs to. I think it needs to happen. I think that grief is something that we embrace and work through.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it destroys us.
Yeah, we have to. You have to work through the grief. It builds character. It really does, and it's like the cheesiest thing to say, right? You know, like going through the hard times builds character. Not necessarily. That's not necessarily true. But dealing with the hard times, that's what builds character. Facing it head on is what builds character. And so when you or your child are able to sit down and actually have a conversation about this and get through it, they're going to be better off because of it. There's probably going to be a lot of crying. There may be some kicking and screaming and gnashing of teeth. But you can get through it. And you're probably going to come out on the other side being a better human being because of it.
Right. And the hardest part about that whole conversation for parents is that you don't have a good answer. There is no good answer that's acceptable to me for why wasn't I wanted.
Because we wanted you more. Well, why? It doesn't matter. No.
None of that matters, and none of it works. And the book we gave away, like, actually kind of explains some of that a little bit better. And it's, because it creates this cognitive dissonance of, like, they loved you so much that they let you go and all these sorts of things, but that doesn't make sense.
To an 11-year-old kid, that means nothing.
Right.
Absolutely nothing.
So it's hard. Mm-hmm. And it creates issues with worth that carry forward. And that is the part that I think for me took the longest amount of time to reconcile.
Oh, me too.
Is to say, I have value. And again, Nancy Verrier says in one of those things that at some point, one of her therapies is to show people babies, right? Infants, and be like, okay, what can this infant possibly have done wrong to deserve rejection?
Right. And
I mean, as a rational adult, I can say nothing, right? Like,
yeah.
Couldn't have done anything. I mean, that's a baby.
It's a baby.
Right?
Babies don't know.
And to accept that also we were babies and therefore not at fault and nothing was wrong with that these are the circumstances of our lives. And that's what we live with, and that's what we move forward. And in order to grieve that as a teenager, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, right? Like, I don't want that for my kids. I don't want, that's not something I want for somebody. But I do know that because we've been through it, we're better for it. And it's prepared us to handle other losses and other things in life more gracefully than I think we would have if it had been the first time we'd ever dealt with those.
For sure. One other thing I want to mention, and it might make the video go a little bit longer, but if you're still here, thank you, first of all, for joining us. But it also kind of put this whole fear of rejection in my mind. Which is one of the reasons why I didn't want to inconvenience people. And I never really had the thought, like, the on the front of my brain saying, my parents are going to send me back or anything. But it was always a lingering fear.
Right.
To get sent back to something that I didn't know, because everything was my fault. Everything was my fault. It didn't matter if it happened to my parents, my friends. I took it upon myself, and I resonated emotionally with it to the point where it was my problem. It was my burden to bear. And it constantly put in this fear of rejection to me, that if I didn't continue feeling that for people, if I didn't continue helping people, if I didn't make them happy or feel good or whatever, they would reject me and want nothing to do with me again. And it was something that, man, like I was old when I finally got through that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was probably in my 20s when I finally broke through, and I was like, I don't care what you think, I'm done, I'm who I am. But growing up as a teenager and as, you know, a middle school kid, you're trying to fit in. You're trying to make friends, you're trying to find your place in the world and at the lunch table or whatever it is. And you don't want to be rejected. You don't want this, you're going to have this fear of people just not wanting anything to do with you and moving on to the next thing. And you don't know why. it's part of it is, you know, we just want, as human beings, we want that connection. We crave that connection with other people. That's how we're wired. Mm-hmm. But there's more to it. There's a psychological and a physical reaction happening in your brain whenever something like that comes up. I don't know. Did you ever have that fear of being rejected or pushed away or
I was
sent home?
I was a preemptor in that I wanted to control that rejection by bringing it upon myself.
By you doing the rejecting,
right? Which again, the middle school years are kind of when this started, but very specifically, I remember like I'm pretty smart. Okay, like in general, I'm not unintelligent. And that's a humble brag, and because my mom said so. But I would do homework, right? And do it well in every subject, and just never turn it in. Because I would experience the grade on that homework as a grade on my life.
They're judging
right?
you.
On me as who I am, and that's a kind of rejection I didn't want to feel.
Right.
Or rather, it's a kind of rejection I didn't want somebody else to have the power over me.
Right.
Right? And so, in order to take control of that scenario, I would turn stuff in late. I would do whatever. Like, I'd do A work and get a D on it by turning it late, just so I wouldn't risk getting a D on it for under its own merits, right? Because of its being
you got to control that,
and that largely was a result of trauma and grieving for me, in not being able to process. Now, granted, let's skip ahead, right? A decade and more later, I'm a 4.0 college student, right? Like in when I finally finished those things. I dealt with the grief and I've dealt with the trauma, and so I'm able to handle that a lot better.
Right.
Now, granted, stuff keeps happening.
It doesn't stop!
Life keeps on occurring, and it's as we continue to deal with that we know whether or not we've actually grown. You know, we might talk about this later on. We might continue this discussion next week. But
I think we will. I think we're going to continue talking about this.
Because we've continued to experience loss, but that loss has changed or the way that we've processed that loss has really changed over the last few years as we've dealt with the adoption side of this as well.
Yeah. So that's it for today's episode. It did go a little bit long, but thank you guys for sticking with it and joining us. Please, we desperately would love to hear your comments on this episode. This is something that pretty much all adopted kids go through at one time in their life, whether they bring it up to you or not. This is something that they're probably wrestling with themselves. So we want to be able to hear your thoughts on this whole subject. If you would like additional resources, go ahead and throw it in the comments. Send us a private message. We would love to be able to help you out some more. Just let us know. This is a more, somber episode?
That would be the word.
More somber episode. Vernacular, baby. I got it.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, Davo.
You didn't even have to Google that.
Do the like, comment, share, and subscribe.
You just did it.
Like, comment, share, and subscribe. We'll see you guys on the weekend update. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Oh, are we on?
You're in the